Slang. It's a word you've definitely heard before. But what exactly is slang? My guess is that your definition touches on at least one of the following ideas that appear in the Oxford English Dictionary's definition. Language that is colloquial, below the level of standard educated speech, or new words. Some of you might have gone in a more negative direction, maybe improper or broken or sloppy, ungrammatical, or even bad language came to mind. And some folks have certainly thought this before, like in this colorful example. Slang is to a people's language what an epidemic disease is to their bodily constitution. Now that's quite an image, but it doesn't, and in fact, not even the dictionary definition does, define what slang is from a linguistic perspective. As a sociolinguist, that is someone who systematically studies language usage, I've always shied away from using the term because of all of these negative connotations. But the best definition of slang I can come up with is any in-group word or phrase and its meaning or meanings, where in-group language designates who belongs to a group and who doesn't. Now sure, slang's in-group status can lead to a colloquial interpretation. And since slang is typically innovative, it usually falls outside of a prescribed standard. But there is no linguistic criteria to support those common negative perceptions. New words aren't ungrammatical, colloquial language isn't sloppy, and non-standard speech isn't bad or broken. For words to be doing their job, all you need is mutual understanding. Shared convention between in-group members is what's key. If you got that, you got good language. Consider this medical record of a dog. I've highlighted some words and phrases that might not be familiar to you here. But does that make them ungrammatical or bad? I doubt you feel that way. Even though they're new to us, none of us would deny that these words still do their job. It's just that you and I aren't the intended audience. They're for a very specific in-group with its own set of words that are mostly only understandable to them. There isn't any linguistic difference between this example and what people would think of as slang. A group of vets and their colleagues are what we call a speech community. This is a group of people with shared conventions with respect to language. A group of teenagers hanging out and chatting, that's also a speech community with its own set of words that are mostly only understandable to them. The difference lies in our perceptions. But here's the thing. Perceptions about language are nothing more than veiled perceptions about people. And the negative perceptions of new, informal, and non-standard words out there, they aren't rooted in linguistic properties of language, but rather in our attitudes about the people who use these words. As Marie Matsuda said, someone who tells you they don't like the way you speak is quite likely telling you they don't like you. Veterinarians and medical professionals, they're well respected in our society, and so is their in-group language. But teenagers, well, they're less well respected, and same goes for their slang. Languages have slang because it functions in two useful and counterbalancing ways. On the one hand, it's a means of social solidarity. Just like our clothes and our hobbies, the places we go, the music and the art that we cherish, and any other way that we express who we are, the language we use sends out signals informing everyone else about the person we see ourselves to be and the groups we belong to. When we're on the receiving end of those kinds of signals and we share those values, we know we're in the company of a potential ally. Slang reinforces social bonds by reminding both sender and receiver of the exclusive aspect of their relationship. On the other hand, slang is a means of defining and maintaining social boundaries. It functions as a mechanism of gatekeeping. It keeps those out of the know, and out of the group. The size of these groups, these speech communities, it can vary from very large partitions of society, say Canadian teenagers, to something really small, like your group of friends, or even just you and your best friend, to everything in between. So slang serves these two functions: social solidarity and gatekeeping. But what happens when slang diffuses outside of the in-group and disrupts this? For the last few years, I've been tracking the media and social media discussion of what has come to be labeled as Toronto slang. This doesn't refer to any old slang spoken in the city. Toronto slang is a mostly agreed upon, though constantly evolving, set of words and phrases that have come to be strongly associated with the city. If you Google Toronto slang, you'll find dozens of articles, videos, and social media posts of people discussing Toronto slang. Here are some examples. First, waist ute. If you watched the NBA Finals last year, you might have seen an image of a fan holding a sign outside the Raptors' home arena that simply read, "Golden State Waist Utes," a play on Golden State Warriors. As you might guess, waist ute is an insult. Another example is Bhakti, also an insult. In the previous round of the playoffs, you might have seen an image of a sign that read Milwaukee Bucktees, a play on Milwaukee Bucks. Other common words associated with Toronto slang include mans, which is a kind of multifunctional pronoun. The use of sentence final still for adding strong emphasis to your statement. A lie, which functions similarly to how we use a in Canada, and bear, which means a lot. If you went to high school in the GTA in the last decade or so, you'll probably be aware of these and other examples. I started to get interested in Toronto slang as a result of a larger project in which I'm investigating how the huge degree of linguistic diversity in this city influences the development of Toronto English, particularly among young people. The main thrust of innovation comes from young recent immigrants and the children of immigrants and the languages they speak at home. It's their multilingual experience that's shaping recent developments in Toronto English. Some of this happens through what linguists call borrowing, where features of one language get transferred into another language. All languages do this. English has been doing it for its entire 15th century history. In the Toronto case, young people bring the languages and words they speak at home to their peer groups. They're culturally and linguistically diverse peer groups, who then come to pick up a few words from other languages. And indeed, most of the words that have been identified as Toronto slang have been borrowed from other languages. So for example, waist ute, bear, and a lie, they're borrowed from Jamaican patois. And Bhakti, it comes from Somali. Toronto isn't unique here. The same thing is happening in London, Berlin, Paris, Stockholm, big cities with a lot of global immigration. But in Toronto, a city where over 50% of the population has a mother tongue other than English, we might expect this to be happening a lot. Here's the thing though. The pattern of borrowing into Toronto slang doesn't follow from the number of speakers of the languages in this city. If that were the case, we would expect a high influence from Mandarin or Hindi or Italian or Filipino. But it's not just any languages that influence Toronto slang. It's two languages in particular, the ones I just mentioned, Jamaican patois and Somali. These are the languages of the largest ethnic group in Toronto that is racialized as Black, Jamaicans, and the largest diasporic group from Africa, also racialized as Black, Somalis. Keeping that in mind, I want to show you some results from a recent study I conducted with a number of undergraduate students. We had participants consider a few different slang words and asked them to imagine the stereotypical person who would use that word. They then described the stereotypical person using a series of 5-point personality and demographic characteristic scales. So things like Canadian, friendly, intelligent, and masculine. Here's one of our main findings. When people ranked Toronto slang words on the Toronto scale, they skewed really strongly towards Toronto. We also asked people to rank the words on a white scale, Given that the Toronto slang words we tested were all sourced from Patois or Somali, we might expect a mirror image of what we just saw for the Toronto scale, a strong skew toward the non-white end of the scale. However, the actual results show a much smaller effect than the Toronto effect. What this tells me is that in the perceptions of the ethno-linguistically diverse young Torontonians who we spoke to, a place-based association of these words is stronger than a race-based association. In other words, despite their Jamaican and Somali origins, these words are perceived to be more Toronto than they are perceived to be Black. Through the process of borrowing, their social meaning has transformed. Now, for some people, there's something positive about this change. It heralds an expansion of the social group, a widening network of friendly faces. This is true for this young Somali Torontonian who we asked about some Somali words that have been borrowed into Toronto slang.
It came from Somalis. We started it. It's a Somali thing. I grew up with that word. But it's sort of like went outside of the Somali community, it just became like a thing, like a GTA, a Toronto thing.
How do you feel about that?
I feel like it's cool. Like I feel like the cultures are, Canada's like a melting pot. Like cultures are just fusing. So it's really cool. Like, yo, how did you know about that? Like, they must have Somali friends.
One result of the diffusion of these words outside of Toronto's Black communities is this kind of transcultural pride. But, on the other hand, there's also a serious concern about how these words are used by people who don't have an authentic claim to them. This young Jamaican Canadian expresses this sentiment.
Do you think everyone's like aware that Jamaicans brought that here?
Nah, a lot of people disrespect it. Like things like Six Buzz kind of ruined it. Like they taught all these little kids the lingo, and now they think they're cool. But like that lingo's been there since before they were born. You know what I mean? So like they add their own meanings to it, and like they switch it up and like they use it all wrong, and it just sounds dumb. You know? Like they think they sound cool, but like in reality, like real ones know that like they just sound stupid.
This change in perception has disrupted the function of slang for Jamaican and Somali Torontonians. These words can't mark intra-ethnic solidarity like they might once have, because non-Jamaican and non-Somali Torontonians also know them. And they can no longer delineate ethno-linguistic boundaries, because these social boundaries have become permeable. What I'm seeing in my research is a complex tension between these ideas. On the one hand, transcultural pride, the Canadian ethos of multiculturalism, and a desire to be part of the cultural mosaic. And on the other hand, a concern about cultural appropriation, where an aspect of a minoritized culture is adopted and used for social profit by outsiders, while effectively harming the minoritized group. In this case, by disrupting the function of slang for Jamaican and Somali Torontonians. This is something linguists have observed elsewhere as well. As Connie Ebel puts it, adopting the vocabulary of a non-mainstream culture is a way of sharing vicariously in the pluses of that culture without having to experience the minuses associated with it. And it's true here too. Non-Black Torontonians can benefit from the coolness of these words without giving credit or respect to their sources. And, for example, without fear of being disproportionately targeted by police violence for the color of their skin. So, should you use these Toronto slang words if you're not Jamaican or Somali? Honestly, I can't answer that question. As a linguist and as an older and white academic, I see my role here as documenting these different attitudes and trying to contextualize them socio-historically and sociolinguistically. I can tell you what the semiotic pathway was that transformed these words from Black to Toronto for many people. But it's not my place to resolve the tension for you, or to dictate how young, racialized people should feel about it. On that, I defer to them, and I implore you to think about this for yourself. Ask yourself, where did you learn these words? From who? Why do you use them or not? What do you think about them? And why do you feel that way? Remember, our opinions about language, they're almost always rooted in opinions about the people who use that language. One of my favorite descriptions of slang is the poetry of everyday life. With slang, the creative aspect of language, it's on full display. These poets of everyday life in this city are young, Black, and often new Canadians. They provide the language spoken here with vibrancy. And this is something that should be respected and should be lauded. At the same time, this is a group that is also underserved, undervalued, and overly discriminated. We can celebrate the genuine transcultural diffusion of slang within our increasingly diverse city. After all, there's no surer sign of social solidarity than shared convention. Our slang is only our slang by virtue of who else is in our speech community. But let's not take. Let's not take what isn't ours, and let's not take what isn't offered. Slang should be gifted to you by the poets.